Hello everybody, I hope you're all well. Welcome back to another Doctor Who Target Novelisation review. In today's review, I'm going to be continuing my look at the 2024 publications. In today's review, The Space Babies. Much like all of the books released within this series, it is of course available as a physical good old Target, which you can't beat putting on your bookshelf, and it is also available as an audiobook read by Claire Corbett. The new series Target Novelisations are always such a lovely presentation, a great size. Of course it's a paperback, making it perfect for the commute. Slot it into your bag, it's incredibly travelable. The dark blue and black Starfield once again continues, introduced with the 60th anniversary targets. It looks incredibly stylish. The 60th anniversary logo is incredibly bold. Of course the Who is embossed with a lovely gold foil. In the top corner we also have the Target Novelisation logo. I do love how this Target logo has persisted for years through so many iterations of Doctor Who history, and here it is once more for a brand new era of Target books, no doubt being introduced to a whole different audience of Doctor Who fan. The titling and author text is also rather bold but simplistic. Light blue colour scheme does also continue onto the spine. It looks very much like a 7th Doctor era Target. Simple but effective spine, the text stands out a lot. Flipping around to the back, the same but effective simple layout, and it is really growing on me actually, the blue and the black colour scheme. You can't beat starting out with a rather ominous quote at the top. A lovely isolated image of the 15th Doctor there. I have a very brief story synopsis and the traditional Target casting list there at the bottom, ending out with the usual company and technical details at the bottom of the book. Much like how I mentioned within the 73 Yards review, a big Target welcome to Daniel Lyles, the new cover artist, and again this is another excellent example of his talents. The likeness to the 15th Doctor is absolutely spot on. I love the use of colour and reflection within the face, picking out all of the details including his facial hair, his moustache. It looks excellent. Once again the excellent likeness for Millie Gibson continues. Of course she was previously featured on the 73 Yards cover. This time she's looking sort of outwards in a rather concerned fashion. What I love about this cover in particular is the textures that are replicated within the clothing. It's incredibly impressive, the use of colour here, the way that it bounces off the rest of the image. There's also so many different elements within Ruby's outfit, that bright red jumper, the leather of the jacket with the fur texturing on the collar. It all stands out a lot. Whole vibe this picture is giving off, especially compared to 73 Yards. The use of the purple and pinkish and red hues on the screens behind, of course, replicating Jocelyn's office. I mean, look how ominous and creepy that looks. It looks like something from a horror movie. Various babies there, Eric. Eric looks terrified. And there's Captain Poppy too. Again, terrifying. If you are a Target book collector, you will absolutely not be disappointed with these releases. They look stunning. So Space Babies was certainly an interesting way to start off the main flow of episodes for Ncuti's first series as the Doctor. It's a light-hearted, fun, fairy tale style story with a sci-fi twist. But the episode does of course also toy with deeper themes as well, the role of parenthood, a sense of belonging, and of course the relationship of children with their parents, and the concept of seeking asylum rather than being in different countries, of course, as we have on Earth. Here we have finding refuge on planets in outer space. There is of course also that argument about life within this story as well, the fact that they've created this machine which generates babies to boost the population, but there's those legal, moral and ethical arguments of if they could turn the machine off or not. As with most of the stories within this first series, the TV episode was written by Russell T Davies, but the Target novelisation has been adapted by Alison Rumfitt. As you would expect, the Target novel follows the TV story in a rather dedicated fashion. I wouldn't say the novel overall is too fresh content heavy, aside from the odd scene juggle here and there. You certainly know what you're getting if you've watched the TV story, which with the Target series that is sort of what you come to expect. It's only in more recent years with the new series Targets that we have grown to see more experimental Target novelisations. This one is more along the traditional route. One of the novel's strengths is certainly the use of perspective. This is Ruby's very first trip into outer space, and yet she is still haunted by her past, her mystery, and of course being a foundling, and being surrounded by babies is a constant reminder of that, so she never seems to be able to escape her past, even if she's on a completely different planet or in the depths of space. I like how Alison digs into the mind of Ruby more than we get on screen, acknowledging that the TARDIS has this capability to travel in space and time, and potentially, of course, back to 2004, Ruby Road, where Ruby was initially found, and and she could even meet her mum. And because of this, because we get a glimpse into her thoughts and feelings, that final scene, once she's given the TARDIS key and the Doctor's reeling off the terms and conditions, saying that he can't go back to see her mother, it feels a more satisfying tie around to the start of the story, because we've heard Ruby's thoughts prior, so the scene doesn't feel like it's almost popped out of nowhere. As I mentioned within my review of 73 Yards, a lot of that most recent series with Nshute's Doctor does seem to be a lot down to interpretation of particular things and reading in between the lines. I don't think that is always the best way forward. Her relationship with the Space Babies is close. She clearly cares for Eric in particular quite a lot and feels a sense of responsibility for him for when he decides to go and face off with the bogeyman in the lower levels of the baby station. The advantage of the target novelisation format is that we get into Ruby's head a little bit more. We see the bizarre traits of the Doctor from her perspective, and of course the way that he responds to situations and how that may differ from Ruby. Both of our protagonists are really well novelised, and due to it being written in prose, I think it allows the reader to dwell on the little phrases and exchanges between these two characters, which are ever so brief on screen. This is nice, as I think it gives the relationship between them a little bit more depth and a bit more consideration. 15 has lots of energy, he has a bouncy personality, but he's also a very authentic, emotional person, hopping between excitement, seeking answers, and of course guiding around the universe for the first ever time. We do have a few suggestions here and there that this Doctor has travelled alone for a while, which is interesting because we don't really know how much time has passed since the events of the Giggle. I certainly infer that a little bit of time has passed. Maybe this Doctor decided to dwell by himself for a while, which perhaps makes the coincidence of meeting Ruby a little bit weirder in Church on Ruby Road, who knows? As always with these books, it's getting that balance, isn't it, when it comes to content? It's an adaptation of a TV story, so it can't be completely changed, and nor should it be. But how much new content, as a reader, should we expect? Personally, I do think TV-wise, there is quite a number of clunky bits within the actual television production, especially in the early half of this episode, and to be honest, that series as a whole. The reduced episode count creates to me the impression of gaps between the stories, which I found really distracting. A simple way that I can represent how I feel with the early episodes of Season 1 is imagine you're watching Doctor Who Series 3, but you only watch Smith & Jones, Gridlock, and Evolution of the Daleks, and you're already halfway through the series. There is evident gaps between the episodes, which make them feel a bit disjointed. I think the series does overall struggle a bit with that reduced episode count, and maybe part of me going into this story was wanting to see the Doctor and Ruby maybe trapped in a room somewhere for a bit, so the story could just pause for a moment and we could get a little bit of a character heart to heart. Maybe this could have even been angled towards the Doctor and developing this new incarnation a little bit more rather than Ruby, because I do feel like she does get quite a lot of attention anyway. And sometimes, especially in the early episodes of the series, maybe the 15th Doctor is a bit underserved until we get to Boom. That's when we really start to see the performance shine. And whilst it is really tempting to kind of hope for this and hope that the Space Babies target includes things like this, it shouldn't really be up to a new writer who is merely adapting a TV story to do that. Their job is to adapt the TV episode and not fill in the gaps, and after all, that is merely me projecting my criticisms of those early stories into the target novelisation, and maybe that's not fair. But I do still think a few additional scenes, maybe a backstory to Jocelyn, a flashback to the baby station being fully operational, would have been a nice context to set up this story, in a similar way that we get within Rogue. We have a little bit of a prequel chapter, which adds a nice context to the rest of the adventure on screen. I think maybe digging into Jocelyn in particular would have been quite beneficial because her relationship with the Space Babies is very interesting, and of course she's in a very difficult predicament, and the way that she's isolated, I do like the way that it's written because of a lot of things that she was saying and the way that her mind can kind of snap between different things. She's got one job and it's to look after the babies. It very much put me right back in the mindset of in the middle of lockdown during the COVID-19 pandemic, where our minds are a little bit fizzled, a little bit all over the place, and she didn't quite know know what to do with herself. Of course, for quite a lot of the story, Jocelyn is using the nanny device, which makes everything she says much more polite and baby appropriate, and I think looking at that dialogue actually on the page I found quite enjoyable and arguably actually funnier than it was within the TV story. It provides something for the adults and the older fans, and I appreciated the use of language. Experiencing target novelizations, I've found, especially with these more recent adaptations, is quite a refreshing way to experience the story. The pages allow for a pause for breath, a little bit of reflection, rather than the rapid pace of the on-screen adventures. Maybe it's down to the way that the recent episodes have been edited, but I think the target novelizations, just every scene seems to flow better, a bit more naturally. The plot elements overall just fit a bit more neatly into place, which then creates a more satisfying, complete final puzzle. And I think one of the best examples of this, and something of which that I am somewhat reluctant to mention, as it is a little bit of a spoiler for what is featured within this book, but bizarrely I also think that it is one of the big selling points of this book, and it's only a really small thing, but the Sugar Babes push the button scene has been inserted back into the story itself. Of course, it was initially removed from the TV episode. It's playing on the TARDIS jukebox at the very beginning of the story as the Doctor is showing Ruby the controls of the TARDIS, and it may seem so ridiculously small, and if anything, this target novelisation actually highlights just how brief this scene is. But despite being brief, it makes the repeated gag, which essentially threads the entirety of this story together, which, let's face it, is actually quite important, actually makes sense. Because of how brief the scene is, I'm going to assume that the main reason why it isn't within the TV story is not time constraints at all, but instead due to legal reasons with the song, and to be honest, given how much it is referred to throughout the rest of the story, you would have thought that maybe if there was going to be legal complications with the song, they would have tried to iron this out much early on, because it is a rather important part of the script, and without it, it doesn't really make sense. And that's not to say that with these changes all of a sudden added back into the story, Space Babies is all of a sudden the next genesis of the Daleks. To me, it is never going to be that, but it gives me confidence in the story because it ultimately feels more finished. I also do like how Alison uses a little fairy tale tropes to relate back to the bogeyman themselves. We get a glimpse of things from their perspective, the way that they are the monster which lurks underneath the bed, the feelings which come with that, and of course the obligation to be the big bad of the story. I think that this really brings out the terror of the episode as well, the way that the characters interact with this rather scary force, the fact that it gets under everybody's skin. I think that this comes across really well within the written form. The story really highlights the fear surrounding the bogeyman, and if anything, the language and the way that wording is used within this book I also think is incredibly accessible. Very much like 73 Yards, this was a book that I started reading and got through incredibly quickly because the vocabulary overall was really easy and it was just nice to read. It wasn't using taxing and complex language, which again is what you expect from a good target novel. And ultimately, I also think one of the big advantages of this target novelisation, particularly for the Space Babies, is that it's not visual anymore, so you can read this story and you can imagine the Space Babies getting up to all sorts and ultimately not looking like how they did within the TV story. And that's not me saying the CGI was really bad, it wasn't. I think they did a really good job. I just think that when you are trying to tackle something like that, it's very, very hard to make the characters look completely real, and there's just something about them within the episode that looks a bit off, and I found that quite distracting. And maybe again, the book should have used that a bit more. Maybe we could have seen the Space Babies doing things that they feasibly could not have got the baby actors within the story to do, because the imagination can do things that they visually can't on screen. So much like the TV story, Space Babies is a light-hearted sci-fi romp which focuses on Ruby ultimately getting to know space. It's fun, it's alright. I think if you enjoyed the TV story, then you will probably enjoy this target novelisation, and likewise if you didn't enjoy the TV story, then I probably recommend avoiding this book because you're not going to get much from it, and it certainly doesn't provide a lot in the way of new content, other than the odd reference and line here and there, but it's still a fun read. So thank you very much for watching this review of the Doctor Who target novelisation of The Space Babies by Alison Rumfitt. I really hope you have enjoyed it. I have already reviewed 73 Yards, so please do check that out if you haven't already, and stay tuned on The Host Productions for more target novelisation reviews on the way soon. Have a nice day, I shall see you all next time.